Our story begins in a place that seems far removed from the chaos of war, the quiet coastal town of Brookings, Oregon. Nestled between the vast, misty pine forests of the Pacific Northwest and the cold, crashing waves of the ocean, this town feels like the edge of the world. If you were to walk into the town's humble public library today and navigate your way to the central display case, you would encounter an object that feels entirely alien to these peaceful surroundings. It is not a dusty history book, nor is it a relic from the American pioneers who settled the West. Resting silently behind the glass is a lethal work of art, a Japanese katana. Its curved steel blade, forged in the fires of a feudal era more than 400 years ago, still glints with a cold, terrifying beauty. It exudes the solemn dignity of an ancient samurai lineage, sitting there next to a small brass plaque inscribed with words of friendship. The presence of this deadly weapon in the heart of a small American town is the strange, almost unbelievable conclusion to one of the least known, yet most profound chapters of World War II. For the man who brought this sword here, the man who once wore it at his hip with lethal intent, was the only pilot in history to ever drop bombs on the continental United States. His name was Nobuo Fujita, and his story is not one of military triumph or destruction, but a painful, decades-long journey from hatred to redemption. To truly understand how this ancient blade ended up in an Oregon library, we must wind the clock back to the spring of 1942. The world was engulfed in flames. Following the devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States was reeling, but it struck back with the audacious Doolittle raid on Tokyo. While the physical damage to the Japanese capital was minimal, the psychological blow was catastrophic. For centuries, the Japanese people believed their island nation was a sacred land, protected by the gods and invulnerable to foreign invasion. Doolittle's bombers shattered that myth in a single morning. Deep within the Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff, the mood was one of fury and humiliation. They needed to restore the Empire's honor. They needed a retaliation plan that would strike fear into the average American citizen, just as the citizens of Tokyo had felt fear. They wanted to burn the American mainland. However, Japan faced a logistical nightmare. They had no long-range strategic bombers capable of crossing the vast Pacific Ocean and returning. The only solution was an idea that bordered on madness: a submarine aircraft carrier. They would use a giant submarine to carry a tiny, collapsible floatplane to the American coast, launch it, and recover it. It was a suicide mission in all but name. Nobuo Fujita, a 30-year-old warrant officer, was chosen for this historic task. Fujita was not the typical, arrogant fighter pilot often depicted in war movies. He was a quiet, serious man who embodied the essence of the traditional samurai spirit: iron discipline, absolute dedication, and a belief that honor was heavier than a mountain, while death was lighter than a feather. When he stepped onto the deck of the giant submarine I-25 at Yokosuka Harbor, he carried not just his flight maps or his service pistol. He carried his family's ancestral sword, the very same sword now resting in that library. He silently swore to his ancestors that he would complete this mission to burn the enemy's land, or he would die with this blade in his hand. For Fujita, the sword was not merely a weapon of war, it was his soul. September 9th, 1942. The submarine I-25 had spent weeks navigating the treacherous, dark waters of the Pacific, dodging American patrols to reach its destination. Now, it surfaced in the black of night off the coast of Oregon, near Cape Blanco. The ocean was rough, heaving with the chaotic energy of the North Pacific. Icy winds whipped across the wet steel deck, stinging the faces of the crew as they scrambled to perform a task that had never been done before. On that swaying deck, amidst the spray of salt water, Fujita and his crew had to assemble their weapon. The Yokosuka E-14Y, nicknamed Glenn, was not a sleek metal fighter. It was a fragile bird made of wood frame and fabric skin, stored in pieces inside a watertight hangar on the deck. In total darkness, guided only by touch and practiced discipline, they attached the wings, secured the pontoons, and mounted the tail. It was a race against time. A single slip on the slick metal, or a sudden appearance of a U.S. destroyer, would mean instant death for them all. Fujita climbed into the cramped rear cockpit. He checked his instruments. Beside him, strapped securely, was his ancestral sword. He looked at his observer, Shoji Okuda, and gave a solemn nod. With a hiss of compressed air from the catapult, the tiny plane was hurled into the void. It dipped dangerously close to the wave crests, the propeller clawing at the thick sea air, before finally gaining lift and banking toward the looming shadow of the American continent. As Fujita crossed the coastline, the scene below him was surreal. Unlike the blacked-out cities of Europe or Asia, America was asleep in peaceful ignorance. There were no searchlights cutting through the sky, no flak explosions rocking his plane. Below him lay the vast, ancient forests of Oregon, stretching out like an endless carpet of pine and fir. It was a sleeping giant, unaware that a mosquito was hovering above its skin. Fujita navigated to his target area near Mount Emily. He wasn't aiming for a military base or a factory. His mission was psychological. He pulled the release lever. 2 76-kilogram incendiary bombs tumbled from the wings. Moments later, a flash. Then another. Fujita looked back and saw 2 columns of orange flame erupting amidst the dark green canopy. The fire had started. Satisfied, he turned the nose of his plane back toward the ocean. The flight back was arguably more dangerous than the attack. He had to find a tiny speck of a submarine in a vast, dark ocean while avoiding radar. Miraculously, he spotted the oil-slick trail of the I-25, landed on the rough waves, and was winched aboard just moments before the submarine had to crash dive to escape detection. Back in Japan, he was hailed as a hero. The press celebrated the bombing of the American mainland. But in reality, the damp Oregon woods had prevented the massive wildfire the Japanese command had hoped for. The physical damage was negligible. Yet, Fujita had achieved something profound. He had proven that the United States was not untouchable. But as the adrenaline faded, Fujita could not know that this act of war was planting the seeds of a personal purgatory that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But history is cruel, and the glory of war is fleeting. 3 years later, the Empire of Japan lay in ruins. The mushroom clouds rising over Hiroshima and Nagasaki signaled the end of an era. The war was over, and Nobuo Fujita, the man who had once flown into the heart of the enemy, survived. But survival, he soon discovered, was its own kind of torture. Fujita returned to civilian life in a defeated nation. He moved to the quiet prefecture of Ibaraki and opened a small hardware store. To his neighbors, he was just a quiet, hard-working man selling nails and wire. They saw a humble shopkeeper, slightly bent by the weight of time. They did not see the pilot. They did not see the samurai. And Fujita wanted to keep it that way. He buried his past deep inside, never speaking of the night he set fire to Oregon. Even his wife and children knew little of the details. For 17 long years, Fujita lived in the shadows. But he was not living in peace. He was living in fear. In his mind, he was a marked man. He firmly believed that he was classified as a war criminal. He imagined that the American military police were constantly hunting for the pilot who had dared to bomb their homeland. Every time a stranger walked into his shop, his heart would race. Every time he saw a foreign car, he thought, "They have found me. It is over." He lived with the constant gnawing anxiety that he would be dragged away, put on trial, and executed for his actions. The ancestral sword, once the symbol of his family's honor, was hidden away in a dark closet. It was wrapped in layers of cloth, like a shameful secret. For nearly 2 decades, Fujita was a prisoner of his own conscience, trapped in a war that had ended for everyone else but him. Then, in 1962, the silence was shattered. A letter arrived at his home in Ibaraki. When Fujita saw the foreign stamps and the postmark from the United States, his blood ran cold. He trembled as he held the envelope. He was certain this was the summons he had been dreading for 17 years. The Americans had finally tracked him down. He prepared himself for the news of his arrest. But as he read the translation, confusion replaced his fear. It was not an indictment. It was an invitation. The Junior Chamber of Commerce in Brookings, Oregon, the very town he had tried to burn down, was inviting him to return. They wanted him to be the guest of honor at their annual Azalea Festival. Fujita could not comprehend it. Why would they invite the enemy? Was this a trick? A trap to lure him onto American soil so they could humiliate him, stone him, and put him on public display as a monster? The Japanese government was skeptical. They advised him not to go, warning that they could not guarantee his safety against angry American veterans. But in that moment of doubt, the dormant spirit of the samurai reawakened within the hardware store owner. He looked at his wife and said, "I must go. If they want to put me on trial, let them. I must face my past." He decided to accept the invitation, fully believing that he might not return alive. In May of 1962, Nobuo Fujita, accompanied by his wife and son, boarded a flight bound for the United States. While the other passengers may have been excited about a vacation or a business trip, the Fujita family sat in heavy, somber silence. They were not tourists. In Nobuo's mind, he was marching toward his own execution. He carried with him a piece of luggage that he refused to let out of his sight. Inside, wrapped in protective silk, was the 400-year-old katana, the same sword that had flown with him in the cockpit 20 years prior. But this time, the sword carried a different, darker purpose. Before leaving Japan, Fujita had made a chilling vow. He told his family that the samurai code, Bushido, demanded honor above all else. If the Americans in Brookings were inviting him there to humiliate him, if they threw rotten eggs at him or treated him as a war criminal, he would not allow his dignity to be stripped away. He would draw that blade and commit seppuku, ritual suicide, right there in the town square. He was fully prepared to die on American soil to wash away the shame. When the plane landed and they made their way to the small town of Brookings, the tension in the air was palpable. While the official committee was polite, the scars of war were still fresh. Many residents of the town had fought in the Pacific. They remembered the brutality of the conflict. Word had spread that the Jap pilot was coming, and not everyone was welcoming. There were reports of protests. A large message scrawled on a wall read, "Jap go home." Fujita saw these signs. His face remained stoic, but inside, his resolve was hardening. He gripped the handle of his sword bag tighter. He was ready. The moment of truth arrived at the town hall reception. Fujita walked toward the venue with the heavy steps of a condemned man walking to the gallows. The doors swung open. Inside, hundreds of townspeople were waiting. As the small, frail-looking Japanese man stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. The silence was absolute. Hundreds of eyes bore into him, eyes of men who had once been his enemies, eyes of women whose husbands had gone to war because of his country. Fujita stood at the podium. He felt small. He felt the weight of history crushing him. But he did not offer a speech of defense. He did not ask for pity. Instead, he did something that stunned the entire room. He signaled to his son, who brought forward the long, silk-wrapped bundle. With trembling but deliberate hands, Fujita unwrapped the ancient weapon. The steel blade caught the light, gleaming with a deadly sharpness. The audience gasped, unsure if he was about to attack. Through an interpreter, Fujita's voice broke the silence, thick with emotion. "This is the soul of my family," he said. 20 years ago, I brought this sword here to destroy you. Today, I bring it here to give it to you." He bowed deeply, offering the sword with both hands to the mayor. "Please accept this as my sincerest apology and my pledge for peace. If you cannot forgive me, please, use this sword to take my head." For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still in the crowded hall. The offer hung in the air, a life for forgiveness. The mayor of Brookings looked at the sword, then at the trembling man bowing before him. He did not reach for the weapon to strike. Instead, he smiled gently and accepted the blade with reverence, not as a spoil of war, but as a gift of brotherhood. And then it happened. The hall erupted, not in anger, not in violence, but in thunderous applause. Men who had fought in the jungles of Guadalcanal and Okinawa stood up, tears in their eyes, clapping for the man they had once sworn to kill. The tension that had gripped the room melted away, replaced by an overwhelming wave of human compassion. In that miraculous moment, the war finally, truly ended for Nobuo Fujita. He realized he did not have to commit seppuku. He did not have to die to restore his honor. He had been reborn through forgiveness. This moment marked the beginning of an extraordinary and unlikely friendship that would last for the rest of his life. Fujita returned to Japan, but his heart remained in Oregon. He felt a profound debt to the town that had spared his life and embraced him. Although he was not a wealthy man, he lived frugally, saving every spare yen from his small hardware business. He used that money to buy expensive English-language books about Japanese culture and sent them to the Brookings Public Library, so that the children there could learn about his country not as an enemy, but as a friend. He hosted high school students from Brookings at his modest home in Japan, treating them like his own grandchildren. He returned to the town multiple times, planting trees in the very forest he had once bombed. The site of the bombing became a sanctuary of peace. In 1997, Nobuo Fujita fell ill. As he lay on his deathbed at the age of 85, he received news that brought tears to his eyes. The town council of Brookings had voted to name him an honorary citizen. It was the highest honor they could bestow. The man who had come to burn their homes was now one of them. After he passed away, his story had one final, poetic chapter. Following his last dying wish, his daughter, Yuriko, traveled to Brookings in 1998. She carried a small urn containing part of her father's ashes. On a crisp autumn day, she hiked into the Oregon woods to the exact coordinates where the bomb had fallen 50 years earlier. There, amidst the tall pines and the silence of nature, she scattered his ashes. Nobuo Fujita had returned. He did not return to destroy, but to rest forever in the soil of the friends he loved, becoming one with the forest he had once tried to set ablaze. Today, if you visit the Brookings Library, the samurai sword is still there. It rests quietly in its case, its blade as sharp as the day it was forged. But it is no longer a weapon of war. It stands as a silent witness to a powerful truth, that courage is not just about fighting. True courage is the strength to face your past, to extend a hand in apology, and the grace to forgive the unforgivable. That is the immortal legacy of Nobuo Fujita, the only samurai to bomb America, and the most peaceful warrior in history.